Welcome back to the Pilipinx-American Stories podcast. We are here to better understand the different aspects of the Pilipinx-American diaspora. We cover topics such as, but are not limited to, history, community, and Pilipinx-American culture. And I am your host, Alfredo. For this week's episode, we have LA's own Justine Ramos. She is a writer and she has her first book coming out early 2021. I had the pleasure in this conversation to hear more about her story, the process behind creating her first book, and some of the deeper meanings behind some of the pieces that she wrote. Again, her first book is coming out in 2021 and the pre-sale link should be up. I highly recommend getting it. And with that being said, I present to you episode 9. All right, welcome back, everyone. We have another amazing episode with another amazing guest for season 2. We have our next guest is a recent UCLA grad, a poet, and has a poetry collection coming out entitled Hollow Hollow, a poetic mix of identity, culture, history, revelation, and revolution coming out this late April 2021. We have Justine on the line. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I'm really happy that you reached out about this because like I don't really get too many people that reach out about their work and everything. I thought that was super dope. I checked out your page like a little bit, saw some of your works on your Hollow Hollow poetry page. I'm just like, yo, you have some really dope stuff on there. I'm just like, yo, I'm super impressed.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was struggling to kind of find my audience. And this was something a lot of publishers told me. The first few publishers that I wanted to sign with told me is that, your poetry, your themes, they're too specific of an audience, like you should make it more general, like to an Asian population. Filipinos are too specific. But I went to Instagram, followed a bunch of Filipinx pages and platforms, and I found you. And I think it's just appropriate for a Filipinx poet to talk about her work in Filipinx platforms like this one. So I'm really glad you started this podcast. Amazing.
Hmm. And 100%, like we'll talk a little bit more about the whole like publishing just like a little bit later because that's a very curious topic to go about because I know that's a very like it's a very like typical thing that goes on for like a lot of publishers when it comes to like generalizing or just like I wouldn't say whitewashing, but it's just like, yo, you're trying to just make you're kind of watering down something just
It's
to get like a wider audience, and I'm like, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's definitely diluting your creativity. And that's what I hated about a lot of publishers. Yeah, unfortunately, that's how it is. But there are publishers out there that are willing to support you in every endeavor. You just might have to do more work for it, but it's definitely out there. Hmm.
100%. And I kind of want to go into just like your origin story a little bit, or like how you've gotten started with writing and everything. So, just like curious, how long have you been writing, and what was the catalyst that got you started with writing in general?
Oh, yeah. So I guess it started when I was like in second or third grade. I wasn't very good with expressing my emotions when I was younger, and I also didn't know how to speak a lot of English. I spoke in Taglish because I was born in the Philippines and immigrated here. And I guess like in a lot of Filipino households, we're encouraged not to act on or speak out about our emotions that we're feeling, you know? So, I mean, you probably heard of your parents say, "Oh, tumahimik ka," or "Ang nipis mo naman," you know? And it was as if crying or like emotions were disrespectful. So I would actually write letters to my mom about how I felt at that moment, and I would slip them under her door or just leave it next to her and she would read them. And I recently found those, and I would consider them poetry. And then later on, I started getting into a habit of making my own like story zines, and I wrote like cliche romantic short stories on Microsoft Word in like fourth and fifth grade. And I would have my parents read it. And then I found the Wattpad platform, and I got really popular on there actually. Then I started like writing essays and winning awards for it, but it wasn't until middle school where I discovered my favorite medium of writing was poetry. And I guess you can say all my teenage angst went into poetry at that time. But it was also a way for me to kind of escape like the social pressures that I was going through. At that time I was living with a lot of people and it was overwhelming for me to not have like a sense of privacy or people to confide into. And poetry was the only time I was able to vent out all of these emotions.
Wow, so it's like this is something that's been actually like with you for like the longest time, like since childhood and everything, but then it transitioned into being just more so like I need this time for myself just to get out like what I'm feeling. Like that was always it sounds like that was always there, but this one sounds more so like yes, I really needed this platform at this time just to get out whatever was going on. And I'm pretty sure like there's a lot of people out there like have gone through like middle school and everything. Middle school was not a hard thing to go through, so it's just like there's a lot of emotions, especially with like puberty and everything, that you kind of just need to get out.
Oh yeah, dude, definitely. But what was interesting is that I never spoke about my poetry. Like I never really let anyone read my poetry. It was almost like a diary that I would like, scribble in the morning and kind of just like it was very cathartic, and then I would just close my notebook and like hide it under my bed, and then the next day I would do the same, but nobody was able to read it. And it wasn't until I found like slam poetry where people were so vulnerable and like raw emotions were on stage, and people were snapping and clapping and crying and you know cheering, where I felt like my poetry had a place on stage and that my poetry could be spoken out loud and emotions are meant to be heard and felt by others. So yeah.
Honestly, that's such a like nice thing to hear because it's like coming from like a Filipinx family or a Filipinx family. It's just like yo, you don't really get the outlet to I guess really express your emotions until probably like way later in life, and even then it's kind of just it's kind of rocky unless your family is conditioned to be okay with that kind of stuff. But like having something like slam poetry or even a spoken word like an open mic, that's like I've seen so many people basically leave their hearts on the table and just be like super vulnerable, and I love that so much. But it's like at the same time it's also kind of foreign, so I'm just happy that you've been able to find like that outlet that was like, oh, they were totally okay with that kind of stuff, and it's not really weird to hear that. That's normal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you relate to kind of sucking in your emotions and not have like being afraid to show your vulnerability and weakness around your family members. And I have no idea why that's so frowned upon in our culture. I think that Filipinx people have every right to discuss their emotions, and they should discuss their emotions with their parents, their grandparents, and kind of just like unravel all of the complexities of like the human mind and emotion and experience. Um, and slam poetry is definitely like a huge platform for people who have experienced that.
Ooh, I might actually do a separate episode just on slam poetry and like Filipinx culture in general because that is such a broad I mean not broad, but it's a very like it's a very kind of touchy subject in the sense that a lot of immigrant families or like people that have immigrated here, like the OFWs, the Monongs and the Monongs and everything, like they didn't really get that luxury to have those like emotional talks or like being able to just express themselves because of just how everything like or just how they've been treated, exploited and everything like that. So it's just that's probably just this is just me like spitting like yo, this is probably something in the future. But like yeah, again, this whole concept of slam poetry, like I love the vulnerability, I love everything about it. But going on to the whole like Filipinx aspect of it, I mean, is that like I mean, do you consider that like part of your style, like being someone that's an immigrant, someone that's experiencing like the Philippine experience? Like, does that look? I mean, does
Yeah,
your style
definitely.
of poetry come from your
Slam poetry.
experiences and everything?
Oh, sorry, you cut off there a little bit, so I couldn't hear you. But yeah, definitely, my style is highly influenced, not not just by the slam poetry community, but the periods of my life where I had to go through immigration. I witnessed close family members get interviewed by immigration, and that was so frightening. I experienced like trying to fit in into an American world in a very Filipinx body, and that kind of just translates a lot to my poetry. But the slam style of writing is very much present in my poetry, in um, with along with all those themes. Um, and if you ever been to a poetry slam before, you know how energetic and emotional and like straightforward the poems are. And traditionally written poetry is very different from the poetry that slam poets write. And I'd like to say that I'm at the intersection of the two. My poetry is like a combination of like the invigoratingly emotional and strikingly direct style of the spoken word, with a lot of traditional elements of writing, such as the line breakings, the stanza structure, the meter, the rhyme, and of course, all of the themes of immigration, belonging, and identity. That's also common in actually both slam poetry and traditional poetry.
I'm actually really happy that you bring up all like these elements and everything because those are some things that don't really get talked about as much. Like
Yeah,
unless you're teaching like a poetry class, like you don't really get to hear that. And just to have that like ingrained in how like you're writing, how you speak to other people is like you kind of have to listen to a little you have to listen to it a little bit more because it's like, yo, there's some serious stuff going here in like in between the lines and everything. Like you have to listen so much more.
yeah. I mean, I'm grateful to have had pursued a degree in English, and I was my professors were top poets, like Nobel, Pulitzer Prize winning poets, and they were just genius, and they taught me all of these elements and styles of writing, which I highly incorporate into my work. A lot of influence from my professors and all the poets that I've met along the way.
Oh, so is your foundation for poetry mainly coming from like these English classes, or is there like more to like the foundation and everything? Well, I mean, aside from those classes and your experience as like a Filipinx immigrant and just living that life.
I would say like a majority of the influence comes from the slam poetry community. It was just kind of cool to experiment how the slam poetry kind of style of writing and more traditional elements of writing can combine. Um, and not a lot of people are fans of that, but I am. And it's really cool to learn from authors and poets from my school, but also in the works that I was assigned to read. Like Terrence Hayes and Maya Angelou, and so many more. Alicia Ostriker. So a lot of those poets have influenced my writing.
Wow, I love that so much. So just going into I guess your process as a poet and as a writer, like what does that look like? Like how do you usually start off? Like is are some of the works that you put out kind of just like coming out of your mind from like a specific encounter or like is it coming from like a past experience? Like what does it look like when you're putting something together?
Yeah, so I come up with various topics along my day. So whether it be a memory I randomly thought of as I was driving, a stimulating conversation that I had, or a topic inspired by a workshop I attended, or a video, or an interaction I had with someone, I write all of these potential topics down. And I don't know about you, but I'm a daydreamer, and I like to um kind of be in like in a nostalgic kind of like moment. I think about like my past a lot when I'm writing my poetry. So I write about a lot of things that happened in my childhood, but I also write about a lot of current events, especially political ones that are happening today. Um, And yeah, I get to them later in the evening. I basically just write a title and I start writing whatever word or line that comes to me when I first think of the topic. And then I look for a theme or metaphor that I can hold on to throughout the whole poem to kind of really hold everything together. And I don't delete anything. I just keep writing and we cut the fat later in the editing process. And when I go into my editing process, I look for ways to enhance certain images or experiences, and I cut out words like that, the, and, or, and then I focus on the flow of the poem with the use of grammar and line breaks and stanza kind of breakings. And yeah.
Oh, this is just like I'm taken aback like hearing this kind of stuff because I don't really get to hear like the process of poetry so much because like I've tried to dabble in it like once in a while, but like I always start to overthink. But it's just like when you said you kind of just have to keep on writing and then just taking care of like the editing portion later, just getting rid of like whatever like you don't need later on is such a like refreshing thing because like you're just concentrating on whatever topic like you're thinking about. Like you're just so focused on everything like that you don't have to worry about anything until like way later. It's kind of just like I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people struggle with in poetry is that they want to make a specific scene or a specific kind of image so vibrant and perfect the first time they write it, but um it's not perfect the first time. Poetry is a process. It takes time. Edgar Allan Poe took years to perfect one poem. T.S. Eliot took years to perfect one poem. So you can't expect yourself to perfect one poem in a span of one day or even 30 minutes. Always keep writing because every idea that you have is a raw and beautiful idea that has come directly from the heart, and you can utilize that in the future. And if you are stuck in a moment of like, oh, I'm stuck and I have writer's block, I suggest to like step away from the screen, take a walk, look for something inspirational to watch or read, and then come back to it because writing shouldn't feel forced. It should feel natural. Kind of like you're carelessly emptying your brain and heart of its emotions, no matter how beautiful or ugly the mess is afterwards. So you just got to keep writing.
Yes, thank you for bringing this up so much because this is actually like at the time that this is going to be released, there's two other episodes that came before this, and they touched upon these kind of things. Shout out to Meta Sarmiento and Nicole Solis. They touched upon this kind of stuff before. I'm just like, yo, this is the kind of validation that I needed to hear because it's like what Nicole was saying was that like you kind of have to make like a whole bunch of like quote unquote like bad drawings and then you'll come to that good one. And then Meta was saying like you kind of just have to live life and just experience things, like step away from like what you're doing. And this is what you're saying is validating because that's something that I feel a lot of artists, regardless of it's poetry or if it's like dance or just kind of like drawing or whatever, like you kind of just need to hear that it's like you are not gonna have that perfect move or that perfect like that poem or that perfect like verse or whatever until like you just give it a little bit more time. And I'm just like, yes, thank you for
Mhm.
validating that kind of experience for that.
Yeah, I gotta let it marinate, like a steak.
I love that little metaphor or like the little simile.
Hmm.
But I mean, since we're on that topic of like just be like feeling stuck, or I mean, you kind of mad like you kind of talked about it a little bit, but like, have there ever been moments where you felt stuck, or like have you, or I guess have you felt like stuck in the past, not so much as of late, but like how have you had those moments before, and if so, like how did you manage, or how are you managing now?
Oh my gosh, I have these moments every single day. But and there was a time where there was 2 weeks where I didn't write anything at all. Like nothing, zero. Like I didn't even open up my my publisher uses this platform called Quip so my editors can see what I'm writing, and I didn't write a single poem in 2 weeks. I had started a lot of poems. Like I started like poems that had maybe one or two lines, and then I look at it and I say, I hate it. This is a horrible poem, and I exit and I jump onto another topic and I never finish it. Um, and I had a talk with my editor, and she was like, don't force yourself to write because you won't ever like the first product or the first version you ever come up with. Writing should feel natural, right? Just like how I said, it's like you're emptying your brain of its emotions. And if you do have those feelings, again, don't try to make things perfect. Like, step away from it. I like to watch slam poetry videos on YouTube and educational videos about the topic I talk about. I like listening to podcasts like yours, like interviews with other Filipinx creatives. I talk to my friends, see how they're doing. I have conversations with my lolo and lola, and that all inspire me because everything they say is poetry. You just have to sculpt it to be in a more, I guess, prettier sense, in a prettier kind of version of it. Um, but yeah, I experience these things every single day, but I manage through it because I have a community and village and friends who I can really talk through like my issues with and get inspired from. So I'm very lucky to be surrounded by very inspiring people, but I think everyone is super inspiring. You just gotta get to know them a little bit more.
Ooh, yeah, honestly, like I think you basically hit the nail on the head with that one. I mean, like just everything about like life is essentially like poetry. Like you even said it, you kind of just have to sculpt it in a way where like you can actually put those kinds of things into words, like
Hmm.
whatever experience you're going through or whatever, like I don't know, whatever thing you've experienced in the past is just like, yo, you could put that into something. But I'm also glad that you have like this kind of support system to get you through these like fogs or these feelings of just like you're kind of just feeling stuck and everything, because it's hard to get through those kind of things sometimes. It's like we're kind of living in like a world where you're expected, or like I don't know, we're conditioned to be like hustling like all the time, or we're expected to be working all the time. So it's just like, oh man, I gotta get this like I gotta get this episode or this like this podcast or like this I don't know, this piece like until like this time or whatever. It's like you're kind of putting that much pressure on yourself to be like, oh, I need to be perfect like this first time and everything. I'm just like, yes,
Oh
again,
yeah.
very validating for that.
Yeah, your worth is not measured by your productivity. Um, a good friend of mine in Anakbayan, UCLA. His name is Chuck. Shout out to Chuck. He reminds me every time that when you measure your worth and your self worth with how much you do, with how much you work, with even how much creative content that you put out, that is like the echoes of capitalism just like taking over you. You have to remember that creativity is not meant to be capitalized on. And your personal kind of revelations um, doesn't have a time period or like a timeline that you should kind of abide by. I made it my goal every day to I made it my goal like for the past 3 weeks to um, write one poem a day. And sometimes I can't even write one poem a day, and that's okay. I've learned to kind of accept that, you know, good things marinate over time.
That should be on a shirt. This is probably like the running gag that's been going on with like every single episode so far. Like everyone has said like that one line that's like you kind of just have to let it marinate. I could see that being on a shirt somehow.
Yeah, you should make merch.
Oh no, this is like that's your line, that's your merch right there. But going into just like yeah, I mean you even said it yourself, like this whole aspect of creativity needs to be natural. You can't put so much pressure on yourself to make something. Even like if people are doing like these intensives for like creativity and all that,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is hard because it's like if you're putting yourself to do that, even if it's just a challenge for yourself to make sure that you're keeping yourself accountable and everything, is like there is susceptibility to burnout, especially like in a very capitalistic culture too.
Oh my gosh, burnout is so real. Yeah, I tried to participate in like the one poem a day in October thing, and I just could not bring myself. I mean, it's great inspiration to keep tabs on, like, to make sure all the gears are running, but you don't have to. You don't have to force yourself into something, into writing something that you don't want to write about, or like you just don't feel like writing at the time, because good poetry is never forced. You know.
Oh, exactly. It's also that thing like it's a want, not necessarily a need. Like you can do it if you want to do it, but like not in like you're not obligated to yourself to do this unless this is something you really want to do.
Yes,
Ooh,
definitely.
okay. So going into our little mid segment or a little mid episode segment, I mean, you already have like this amazing project coming out, but
Huh.
I mean, like, I usually ask this question just to gauge where people want to take their craft. Just like, what is like a big thing that people want to do? So, aside from this poetry collection that is coming out this late April, do you have like a dream project as a writer, or is there a next big thing that's maybe coming out after this upcoming poetry collection?
Oh man. I'd really love to give my own TED Talk one day as a poet laureate, or become a MacArthur Fellow, or yeah, being like a national poet laureate would be super cool. Um, but I'd really love to start my own publishing press and like seek out writers and poets of color, and not set any kind of creative caps to them. Just or a lot of publishers try to restrict the kind of message that you want to send out, whether it be because it's too political or it's too aggressive. But I think poets of color, like creatives of color, have been left out of the narrative for so long, and I want to build a platform that's genuine and authentic to that. One that doesn't have that isn't hasn't historically been a press of white authors. It's been about creatives of color. And I'm also thinking of, so I'm actually applying to graduate school for occupational therapy. And for my experience, I worked with adults with brain injuries, and I organized creative writing activities for them, which help them get cognitively stimulated and practice their fine motor skills and just teach them how to process emotions and events. And I'm really interested in exploring the intersections of creativity and rehabilitation medicine, and see how those play out with each other.
Ooh, so many big things right there, but I guess just going on the whole like publishing thing first, like I know there are some publishing companies that do that, but there honestly I feel like there isn't enough, or at least there aren't any that are as accessible, because it's just like
Right.
yeah, there's just not as much because I don't know a lot. I guess a lot of people just don't know about them or whatever. But that kind of project or that kind of like publishing company is something that I personally feel like we need just out there a little bit more, regardless of whatever kind of thing you're trying to publish, because it's like, yo, you need someone that gets your values and everything, that doesn't try to water like your narrative down and everything. And just going onto the topic of like your grad school thing, that
Hmm.
is super dope because I don't, again, that's another thing I don't see as often. There's a
Right.
very like, I don't know, there's something about creative stimulation that I don't know, just affects the brain in such a different way. Like you don't always have to be like working on like certain thing, but like having I don't know, just like little nodes in your brain activated through like some kind of creative stimulation and everything. I mean,
Uh-huh.
just going back to just how we were as kids and everything, like playing on the playground or whatever, and just like making stuff up, imagination and all that kind of stuff. It's like, yo, when it comes to creativity, like whether it be dance, writing, whatever that may look like, it's like, yo, this is helping your brain get that kind of stimulation. And I'm just like, yo, I've never heard like poetry or like creative writing in that kind of sense. So I think that's pretty dope.
Yeah, I mean, I think creativity is a part of health, and the profession of occupational therapy really emphasizes that. And one thing that I've been struggling to kind of mm, I guess accept about poetry is that how much does it can it change people? How much can it change the world? And I've had a conversation about this with my professor. Her name is Professor Harriet Mullen, um, great poet, very well known, famous poet. And she told me once, we had a conversation, and she said that, poetry is great, but I don't think it can change people. I don't know how much it can help people. I don't know how much it can change the world. Um, and maybe a part of like her kind of advice to me is comes from maybe her own, I guess, hopelessness in her profession, and like, how much the world hasn't changed since she's been writing poetry. But occupational therapy is a way for me to really individually bring creative writing in a way that can help people find meaning in their everyday lives. When I work with these adults with brain injuries, they couldn't really write. They couldn't write, they couldn't hold a pencil. But because of technology, they could dictate anything that they want to be said through a computer. And they talked about like their traumatic experiences in such a way that um, couldn't really be translated in plain language. And a lot of them couldn't speak well either. So we had, adaptive technology to help them write. But that was one of the first times where I was really touched by how creativity can influence someone's health and change like the meaning in their lives, you know.
Even if it's something as small as that, or even from their perspective, that might be something that's very big. I feel like that is some kind of change. Like I kind of get like where I guess your professor's coming from a little bit, but it's just like change doesn't even have to be that completely drastic. Like if someone's like words has some kind of impact, there is that little bit of change. And just like, I mean, the example you even put, it's like some people didn't have like this kind of like function before, and now they are able to like express themselves in a way that they couldn't do previously. So if anything, that is some kind of change in my opinion, at least.
Yes, yeah. Um, I guess I'm trying to find ways to to kind of give her hope again. But, I think for myself, I'm still trying to navigate that. But I don't think it's impossible that poetry can change the world. I do think it's very possible because words are powerful, and poetry is even more. So, yeah.
It might just have to be one of those ways that everyone just has to figure out like what niche they're doing with their writing and everything, because like I mean, poetry has changed, or just like words in general have changed so much, whether it be like negative or positive. I mean, if you look at like some, I guess, modern artists today, like a lot of people have influenced other people to pursue writing as like a passion. I mean, like there were a lot of students or like kids back in my like class back in high school and everything that were inspired by a lot of the rappers of like the 2010s, and it's just like, yo, there's a lot of people like pursuing that kind of stuff now. And I feel like if
Yes.
that isn't changed, then I don't know what is. I
Yeah.
mean, like one of my favorite videos of like all time as of like this past decade is how, I don't remember what school it was, but it was like on the East Coast, and Kendrick Lamar was like helping out a teacher with like a poetry class, and just like showing how words can be super powerful, and like there is
I
that
know
kind
that.
of
I know
change.
that video. Yeah.
Yes, that one is just like, yo, this could, I don't know, something about just how much impact words can like have on someone is like, it's just insane to think about it, because it's not always tangible. It's just at some point it's gonna be reality. I just don't know how to put words into that, but yeah, there is possible change with it for sure.
Yeah, I really do think so. I mean, one of my favorite poets of all time is Tupac Shakur. You know, he Tupac is one of the main reasons why I started getting into slam poetry. And his his lyrics were poetic. He was a poet, you know, and his legacy still stands today. Everything that he talked about in his songs still stands today. Every detail about police violence and brutality and capitalism and like racism and classism, violence against women are still very pertinent today, and whether or not that's a direct influence on direct influence by his work is, maybe arguable, but there's a reason why the NWA was flagged by the FBI when they came out with their songs about police brutality and there were people uprising. There's a reason why, a lot of Tupac's fans started protesting and rebelling against, the kind of oppressive systems that are put in place. It goes to show that words can change things. It can instigate inspiration and motivation to change things, but it's just like the society around us tries to tone those words down.
I mean, just look at like I mean, you mentioned people like Tupac, uh like guys like NWA. I mean, the fact that people are still talking about them, I mean, that is like impact in itself. Like people still like reference some of like Tupac's old raps and everything. I mean, going as far back as like what was this album Tupacalypse Now, people still talk about it. Like people are still talking about Straight Outta Compton like decades from now. It's just like, yo, this is I mean, even if it's not drastic, it's like, yo, there's still like impact happening, and like I have to wholeheartedly agree with
Yes, yes. You took the words out of my mouth.
that. So going more onto like your actual project and everything, like what exactly is Halo Halo a poetic mix of identity, culture, history, revelation, and revolution? Because there's a lot of little nuances just in that title alone. So like what exactly is it?
So Halo Halo is a collection of poetry about the Pilipinx and Pilipinx-American identity, history, and my personal revelations in rediscovering the history and culture of my people, and finally the revolutionary fervor that has developed throughout this whole journey. And I decided to name my book Halo Halo after the iconic Filipino dessert that literally translates to mix mix, right? I'm sure you've had it. I wanted to pay homage to the multi-layered and complex mix that is Filipino culture. So all of the colonization and even the intercountry in like sorry intercultural kind of civil wars that happen inside our culture and the community conditions that affect so many of us today. I wanted to explore all of that mix, and I wanted to also explore my childhood experiences as an immigrant, my family relationships. My poetry navigates the way I realize that America isn't all that it's painted out to be. In the Philippines, I talk about sexism, racism, colorism, and ageism. I critique both the American and the Philippine governments, and the mix of all these topics seems very confusing and varied. And like you said, there's so many nuances to kind of extract from these themes, but just like a halo halo, it all falls in place, even though it's just kind of like a lot of things that come from different places.
Wow, so it's kind of just a lot of, I guess, just a little bit of everything just put into it. I mean, like the fact that you're naming it Hollow Hollow is just like another layer to that kind of stuff. Like, even though they are very different things, at the end of the day, it's just like it makes sense at the end once you're like reading it. Like, you're picking like your brain of just like what you're thinking, like how you're seeing the world, and just everything that's basically going on. So, is just all these little nuances like the inspiration behind this entire collection?
Yeah, so it all started with a poem that I wrote. And I didn't name my collection yet. It was still untitled. And I called this poem Halo Halo. And it's basically me responding to this boy in elementary school who called me a mutt because he couldn't understand how I looked Asian, but had a Hispanic slash Latino sounding name, but also had, Asian kind of cultures and cultural values, and but also had Hispanic slash Latino kind of um, sounding, like, I guess, Spanish sounding language. Um, and I kind of go back into this moment, and I use the metaphor of a halo halo to kind of respond to this boy, and I unpack everything that's in a halo halo. And interestingly enough, I actually did a lot of research on the origins of halo halo, and everything in a halo halo comes from a different country. The red beans come from Japan. Um, the evaporated canned milk comes from the United States. The langka, the jackfruit, comes from the Philippines, obviously, but a lot of we have origins in Japan. Oh, leche flan comes from Spain. So all of these ingredients of a halo halo are so varied and so multicultural and complex, yet there's nothing more iconically Filipino than a nice cold halo halo in a summer's day, you know? And it just goes to show, no matter how complicated our colonized past is, that doesn't dilute our identity. Even if I am Filipino American, I'm still 100% fully Filipino, identifying. um, and yeah, sorry, that was a mess, but
No, that's totally fine because it just reminded me of this. I don't remember what site it was. It might have been on I don't remember what site. It was like one of those I don't know if you might have seen that article like a few years ago, but it was like someone was doing their like DI like their own DIY like hollow and everything, and the stuff just looked like trash, like in my own opinion, but it's just I think it was Bon Appetit. It might have been them, but like I wasn't really sure, but it's just
oh,
people
it
were
was
putting like shaved ice in there, popcorn, like a whole bunch of candy in there, and just like that kind of
popcorn.
it was disgusting. Like this was the it kind of looked like something that just some straight out of someone's trash, like straight up. Like I'm not even like joking about that. It's just like it looked kind of nasty, but like you telling me the history about like what Hollow Hollow is, like more importantly, like especially since I haven't really dug deep into it and everything, is like it brings another layer to what like Filipinx culture actually is. I mean, we come from a very like colonized past. The fact that we have like some people could pass off as like Chinese looking, or like some people have like these Hispanic last names, and the fact that we have like these Asian like features or whatever, it's like yo, there's a reason to that. There's so many layers of like colonization, so much like I don't know, there's so much occupation in like the Philippines alone, and the fact that even the name itself is like, yo, this is a very Spanish name, like named after King Philip from Spain. It's just like, yo, there's you can't like even though we do have this colonized past, like you were saying, it's like it doesn't also negate the experience that we're having, even though we are still trying to like get past it or grow past it or something.
Yes, yeah, definitely. But yeah, when I was writing that poem, I realized that, well, this is a perfect title for my whole collection, because I'm exploring all of these layers, no matter how complex they are, and compiling it into this one book. So, yeah, that's how Hollow Hollow came to be, and I hope that not only that poem, but the whole collection reflects what I'm trying to say about Filipino culture and identity.
Hmm. So going on to actually like putting the book together or like the collection together, like what was it actually like? I mean, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning about the whole publishing experience, but like how was the overall like process of putting it together?
Oh my gosh, it's still definitely so scary. This isn't the first publisher that I wanted to sign to. I was approached by a few publishers beforehand because of my involvement in the slam poetry community. I was a part of Get Lit, Words Ignite, and I competed in their slam competitions for 4 years. Um, and so I've already had connections with pretty well known publishers at that time. But again, when I came back to them and I was ready to write my book, they were like, "Well, this poem is too political. Like, this theme that you have is too specific. Like your audience isn't wide enough, you know. Um, and there's a lot of pressure to just sign onto a publisher because it's well known, because you get more royalties on this publisher, or because this publisher has connections to the biggest bookstores in the world, or this publisher is known to carry a lot of famous authors. There's a lot of pressure in that. But what I've come to realize, and what I've discuss with my professors who have been published, is you want to find a publisher that believes in your story, in your mission, and even if they may not have all of the grand resources that a bigger publisher has, they won't they won't dilute your creativity. And that was my main focus, was I don't want to find a publisher that dilutes my creativity. And so the process is still very scary, like every contract that I sign is terrifying, and I admittedly have to run to my mom to ask me to ask if I'm like reading it right. It's a lot of complex like laws and agreements. But I guess one of the biggest pressures is I keep thinking that my poetry isn't good enough, and maybe like my themes are too repetitive. But I've come to realize, as I'm nearing the end of writing my manuscript, is that these stories are so important to talk about and to spread among the community and to inform people who are non Filipinx identifying, about our history. So even if it is, repetitive, or has like the same reoccurring themes, it's something that hasn't been talked about for years. And I think that every Filipinx poet has a right to kind of make sure it's ingrained in their work.
The fact that those themes recur a lot speaks very heavily and everything, because
Yeah.
it's like, yo, this means that this theme or this story is super important. And like you even said it, like these stories, these narratives need to be told. And that's why I don't really understand, like, I mean, there's probably like some bit of disconnect when it comes to different like publishing companies, because they some people just don't get it. Like, yo, these are like my lived experiences. This is like what I've gone through. This is what I've seen people go through in the past, or even just in the present now. It's like you can't water that kind of stuff down. Like you, I mean, I get it. Like for if you're thinking from like a marketing standpoint, you need to be able to get like the widest reach possible. But like sometimes you don't always need that wide reach. You need more like quality more than quantity at times, especially with something like this, because it's like, yo, you need to just like this is something to have a conversation on. And even you need more quality conversation when it comes to this kind of stuff, because people
Yeah.
just need to understand, like, you can't water this kind of stuff down, because that eliminates the whole aspect of conversation. And it's just like, yo, you can't well, I'm happy that you've gone with a publisher that's actually like down with like your vision and everything, because like now you don't have to water that kind of stuff down, and you can actually speak more from the heart, and it's not as like, I guess, like downplayed as much and everything. So I'm super glad that you're in this like current journey right now with this current publisher.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very grateful for New Degree Press and my mentors at Georgetown University that really helped me with the process. But it's a struggle. It really is a struggle, but it needs to be done because I believe in our community, and I believe in my village, and I believe in the culture of Bayanihan, and I know that the Pilipinx community will come through.
Oh, 100%. And I feel like you just need to continue having that kind of mindset and everything, because again, you're speaking so much from the heart when it comes to your work, and people will hear that. And I'd rather have someone that's a little bit more authentic with their work coming from the heart, rather than someone that's just doing it to make a quick buck.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
100%. And just going on to our second to last question and everything, I you pretty much like said it like throughout this entire episode and everything. But what is the main thing you want your audience to get out of this project?
I want people to find the courage and motivation to learn about their culture and to surround themselves with people who understand or want to understand their culture. And I hope that this book tells readers that it's okay to talk back and stand your ground when you don't agree with a certain political ideal, or you don't agree with a tradition um, in our community, if you um, like want to speak up about community conditions that bother you and that make you insecure about yourself. I hope that it gives people that kind of push to start fighting against some of the toxic values in our community that can be repaired and fixed, and at the same time find it within them to realize the society that we're living in and what they can do to be better advocates for people of for BIPOC communities and um, underprivileged neighborhood. Oh, sorry, I'm kind of going on a rant, but I really hope that people find the courage to kind of speak up and speak out against all the injustices that they see in this world.
And kind of just bringing this a little bit more full circle, like you said it like earlier on in the episode, is that poetry has a way to change people. Words are able to change people, and the fact that you're bringing this into like literature that you're creating and just hoping that this is going to be the thing, I'm pretty sure there's going to be conversations that will be had. If not, will continue on. I'm just like, yes, I'm happy that you're contributing, especially with such a powerful platform like this. I mean, we need to continue having this conversation. We need to continue wanting to change, like, or just like go against like all these injustices that are going on in the world and everything. Like, yes, continue having this conversation. So again, super glad that you have this kind of platform and you're going to be putting out this book very soon.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm like rambling, but it's a loaded question. And I don't know. If when people get my book, I hope they tell me what they get out of it.
Oh, 100%. And just going on to our last section, we reached our little advice section for the episode. So I try to just gauge where people will give advice to other people in their current discipline. So, what advice do you have for people that are just starting out with writing?
Um, hmm. I think the best way to write poetry is to read poetry, listen to poetry, watch slam poets, go to your library or your local independent bookstores, go onto Button Poetry and buy their books and listen to their poets online. Learn synonyms and antonyms to mundane words. Participate in creatively stimulating activities, and most importantly, it's to experience life. Great poetry comes from lived experience, and that doesn't mean your life has to be exciting. Some of the most popular poetry are about boring things. There's literally a poem called The Red Wheelbarrow. Um, and it's like three or four lines or something. And it's a really popular poem that like English majors have to learn about at school. So sometimes the boring things can be beautiful if you just look for it. And the key is to find the beauty or perhaps the sadness in everything. It's thinking that everything in this world has a message and a purpose, whether it be the flies around rotten fruit to the wood sitting next to your fireplace. I think everything has the potential to become a poem. Everything is a reflection of something else. So, um, I would encourage you to use figurative language in your everyday life, and it stirs things up a bit, makes your conversations way more interesting and funny and more vibrant. So, I definitely encourage you to kind of be a writer outside from writing on a paper or typing on a computer. You're a writer when you're talking with your friends, having conversations and writing emails or whatever. You have to practice being a writer in your everyday life, in the little things. And yeah.
Ooh, I love all of this advice. It's like there's so many different things that people just need to experience. Like you don't even have to write. I mean, like you said, you don't even have to write by actually writing down on a piece of paper. Just live, just like learn your foundation and all that. So I really much appreciate the advice that you're giving to people.
Yeah. Um, but most definitely read other people's poetry, because those are the most inspiring. And yeah, a lot of poets and writers think they have to live like a very exciting life to know how it is to make their writing exciting. But I mean, again with the Emily Dickinson thing, she couldn't even go out of her room, and she has one of the most, vibrant and exciting poems that you could ever read. You know, um, you don't have to be a world star, a world like superstar like Tupac Shakur to really have great poetry. You can just be you. And yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. With that being said, we've reached our like the end of the episode and everything. So, I mean, like with this poetry collection and everything, like where can people like purchase it when it comes time to release, or like where can people follow you for like different updates when it comes to this collection and everything?
Yes, so all of the updates about my book, the timeline, the pre-orders, um, when I'm shipping out all the books can be found on my poetry Instagram at holoholo.poetry, HALOHALO.poetry. That's my poetry Instagram. You could also follow me at my personal um, to get maybe some exclusive sneak peeks on what I'm working on, or when I get my shipments. But Poetry is the site to go to, and my book will be available on Amazon. And I'm currently speaking to a lot of independent bookstores and national bookstore in the Philippines, to kind of get my book out there in the mainland. So yeah.
Ooh, I'm super excited for that. And before we end up, did you have any like last shout outs or any kind of other plugs that you want to give before the episode ends off?
Let's see. Shout out to Get Lit Words Ignite for really honing in on my creative talents and for believing in me. All of my professors, my parents, and my family members and friends who have really supported my journey along the way. You know who you are. Much love to you. And all my kasamas at Anak Bayan. Love you guys as well.
Heck yeah. And thank you, Justine, for creating such a vibe with this episode and everything. I'm super excited for your journey moving forward with this poetry collection and whatever comes afterwards. So, again, thank you for creating such a great vibe and thank you for being such a great guest for today.
Thank you. I talk a lot, so I'm super glad that you're super patient.
And that being said, thank you again for being on this episode. And thank y'all for listening to this episode so far. We have just a few more episodes of this season to go. So just make sure to stay tuned for that. And with that being said, thank y'all for listening.